Hello and welcome to the class. My name is Daniel. Today we're going to be looking at vocabulary and grammar in the IELTS speaking. If you have a question after the class, you can go to the top of the screen and click on the chat icon to send us a message. This is the first of two classes and will last just over 20 minutes. First, we're going to talk about grammatical range and accuracy, and then we're going to look at some tips that can help you to improve that. So by the end of the class, you should be more familiar with how this affects your speaking score. During the class, there'll be questions for you to answer. These will appear below the video. I'll tell you when you need to answer them, and I'll give you 10 to 15 seconds for each one. So let's look at what grammatical range and accuracy is. Well, as you can imagine, it's the grammar part of the speaking, so that where the examiner is assessing your grammar. And we can see here the marking criteria that they use to assess it. And you can see here it's going from 6 to 9. 9 is the highest. It actually goes down to 0, but we're just going to focus on 6 to 9 here and look at some of the key features. Now, one of the words that comes up in all of them is the word structures here. Structures. And structures are different types of sentences, different ways of organizing your sentences. And depending how many different ones you use, you can get a higher or a lower mark. So here you can see it uses a full range of structures naturally and appropriately. So the person uses them in a very natural way, like a native speaker almost. Whereas at the bottom, you can see it uses a mix of simple and complex structures. Now we're going to see what's meant by complex structures in a moment. Another thing is error-free sentences. So if you're making lots of mistakes, then obviously you're going to get a lower mark for your grammatical range and accuracy. And you want to produce error-free sentences. So an error-free sentence means a sentence with no mistakes. Here you can see it says frequently produces error-free sentences. So that means the majority or a lot of the sentences have no errors in them. Whereas here it says a majority of error-free sentences. So, a large portion of them are error-free. And again, we're going to look at errors in the coming slides. So let's summarize those points. We've got complex structures, which, as I said, we're going to look at in a moment. Flexibility, so how naturally or flexible you can be with using them. The number of mistakes that you make or errors that appear in your sentences. So let's start by looking at what is a complex sentence. Well, it's a sentence made from two or more clauses connected by a linking word. So we first need to understand what is a clause. Well, a clause is part of a sentence containing a subject and a verb. For example, here we can see the car is the subject and broke down is the verb. Now, this is a sentence because it ends with a stop, but it's a sentence which contains one clause, one subject, and one verb. If there's two subjects, two verbs, that means there's two clauses. Let's see some examples in a minute. Then, thinking about the linking words, well, linking words are words like while, where, when, who, which, because, so, therefore, and, but, if, that. All these words that connect sentences together or connect clauses together in a lot of different situations. So there's some common complex grammatical structures that you might be familiar with and that could be used in your speaking. For example, you might have conditionals. So conditionals are the if clauses. And we can see in this sentence, we have one clause here because it has one subject, I, and one verb, that's have. So that's one clause. And here we've got I play. That's another clause. So there's two clauses in this sentence, and they're connected by the word if. If is connecting them together. So this is a complex sentence. Two clauses connected by one linking word. So conditionals are a good example of that. Relative clauses are also complex sentences. So you've got one clause here, I think. There's the one subject, I think is a verb. And then the past time is, that's another subject and another verb. So that's two clauses. And then we can see you've got a subject here and a verb. So that's another clause there. So you've got three clauses. And you've actually got two linking words. You've got the linking word that, and then you've got the relative clause linking word, which is which. So three clauses in there. So again, that's a complex sentence. Participle clauses, the problem worrying me at the moment is the amount of plastic. So we've got the problem worrying me. This is the subject, and then is the verb. So you've got subject and verb. So that's one clause, but actually then you've got this worrying, which means which is worrying me. So that actually is another clause there. That's called a participle clause. So you've got two clauses in there. This would be another complex sentence. Then sentences with that are very common. So I, subject, strongly believe is the verb. And then you've got the that is the linking word. And you've got free healthcare is the subject and is. So you've got two subjects and two verbs. That's two clauses. And you've got the word that, which is linking those two clauses together. So this is another example of a complex sentence. And another one we can have is reported speech. So where you're explaining what another person said to you or told you. So we've got he is the subject, told is the verb. So there's one clause. We've got a that, which is the linking word. And then we've got I, subject, should put is the verb. So two clauses there, and they're connected by the linking word that. So reported speech, another example of a complex sentence. So let's have a little bit of practice with this. What I'd like you to do first is just look at question 1 below the video and see for sentence A, how many clauses does that contain? And I'm just going to give you 10 to 15 seconds to choose the correct option. Okay, well, let's look together. So we've got I is the subject, would love to travel is the verb, and then we've got I as another subject, finish is another verb, and it's connected by the linking word when. There's two clauses in there. So the correct answer for that is 2. Now I want you to look at questions 2 to 5 and try to do the same for these 4 sentences. And I'll just give you some time to try that. Okay, so let's check these together now. Well, we can see here we've got I as the subject, think is the verb. We've got a relative clause here, so that means that most tourists is the subject here and visit is another verb. But then we've got the place that most tourists visit in my country. That's all one subject and is a verb. So we've got 3 subjects and 3 verbs. So we have 3 clauses. And we've got 2 linking words. That and that are the 2 linking words there. For C, we've got the large amount of pollution in the atmosphere. All of that is the subject. And then is causing is the verb. So there's just one subject, one verb. So that's 1 clause. Then we've got I, subject, would say. That's a verb. We've got a relative clause here, who. And actually, when you've got who as the relative clause, this is a subject and this is a verb, who is. And then we've also got the person who is most responsible for this situation. All of that is one big subject, and the is here is a verb. So you've actually got 3 subjects and 3 verbs. So you've got 3 clauses in that sentence. Now let's look at E. Well, we've got I as subject, guess is the verb. We've got I as another subject, have only had is the verb there. That's 2 clauses. Then we've got my parents is a subject and got is a verb. And then we've got it is a subject and is a verb. So we've got 4 subjects, 4 verbs. So we've got 4 clauses and we've got 3 linking words. We've got that is one linking word. Even though is a linking word or phrase. And we've got which is another linking word or phrase. So 3 linking words and 4 clauses in that sentence. So A, B, C, and E are all examples of complex sentences because they have 2 clauses or more joined by linking words. Now let's look at grammatical range. Well, remember, grammatical range is how many different types of grammar you can use, how many different structures. And there are so many different types. So let's think, how many different grammatical structures can you think of? Well, we're going to go through a few together here. So the first thing you might think of is tenses, like present simple and past simple. So those are some different types of structures. You could also have aspects like perfect aspect, present perfect, or continuous, like present continuous. So if you're familiar with those, then you have opportunities to use them in the speaking. Other things like future forms, talking about the future, using maybe will or going to, or something like that. Passives, passive structures, where you're saying it was built or it was done by someone. These are another example of a grammatical structure that you could use. Conditionals, which we looked at before, which are the if clauses. Participle clauses, which we saw one example of before, those are ing clauses. Inversions, this is where you're moving the subject and the verb around. Now, these are quite high-level structures, inversions, but if you know them and you're familiar with them, you can use them in your speaking to get higher marks. Relative clauses, like we saw with which, who, where, when, those types of things. And modal structures with like may, might, could, or may have, might have, could have. And you could have like some emphatic structures or cleft sentences. Now, this is just a few. Oh, we could also have reported speech as well, which we've seen. Now, these are just a few examples of structures that you might want to use. And the more that you know and the more that you use, the higher a mark you'll get for your grammar in the speaking. So let's have a look at a few grammatical errors. Now, I want you to look at these sentences and say which is grammatically correct. So we've got the teacher who taught me guitar was really enthusiastic. The sooner something is done to help the poor, the better the results will be. I'm a keen reader. I've been reading 4 books this year. If I am them, I would move to another city. The crash happened while I was driving to university. So look at the question below the video and see if you can choose the correct option, which is grammatically correct. Okay, well, let's go through them one by one to see. It says the teacher who he taught me guitar was really enthusiastic. This is not correct. It's got this who, he. Now, who is a subject? And so we don't need another subject. So 2 subjects together don't make sense. So we need to delete he. So the teacher who taught me guitar was really enthusiastic. That would be correct. Number 2, the sooner something is done to help the poor, the better the results would be. This is correct. This is fine. This is called a double comparative. The sooner, the better. And you can have it in 2 clauses. Now, it's quite a nice structure that you could possibly use in your speaking. So 2 is correct. 3, I'm a keen reader. I've been reading 4 books this year. Well, this I've been reading, this is present perfect continuous. When we want to say how many, so 4 books, 5 books, 6 books, we don't use present perfect continuous. We would use present perfect simple to say how many. So you'd say, I've read 4 books this year. So that's not correct. Number 4, if I am them, I would move to another city. Well, this is a conditional. Now, this is an imaginary conditional. So we need to put here, instead of am, we need to change it to was. If I was them, or if I were them. Both of those would be correct. And then that would make it a correct sentence. If I were them, I would move to another city. And that's a second conditional. And then the last one, the crash was happened while I was driving to university. The problem here is was happened. Now, happened can't be put into a passive form. It can only be active. So was happened is a passive structure. So what we need to do is just delete was and say the crash happened while I was driving to university. That would be correct. So with happened, we need to use an active form. So these are some typical errors. The first is with relative clauses. The second is with aspects, so present perfect continuous versus present perfect simple. The fourth is conditionals, and the fifth one is a problem with understanding passive versus active. Now, these are just some examples of grammatical errors that you might have or that might come up in your speaking. The most important thing is to learn your own common errors. So when you're in class or when you take a test online or do some practice activities, if it says you made a mistake, make a note of what mistake you made, particularly with speaking, as we're talking about the speaking exam. Notice what mistakes do you make when you speak. Make a note of them and see if you can work to try to improve those. Well, remember, if you have a question, you can go to the top of the screen and click on the chat icon to send us a message. Now take class 2 on this topic, and remember to complete the online training and do the practice activities. Thank you very much for coming to the class. We'll see you again. Goodbye.